with Mark and Tim.
It is the Dev Friday show. It is Mark and Tim. Zero prep as always. I didn't remember. Last night I was mixing the last show, and I was like, I know we talked about what the title for the next show should be, but I don't even remember. This morning I fire up Restream, and at least we did actually change it. So, Lakeside Solutions. I mean, it sounds like a real estate agency
or insurance company.
That's true too, right?
Or
right?
no, a retirement.
Lakeside
annuity.
Solutions. Yeah, I could see that. All of those. I like it. We could go into business. Any of these seem like reasonable ideas. So,
you know me, Tim. I'm always up for a new venture.
There you go. Anyway, so that's all I got. I got Lakeside Solutions, and then maybe we should start selling insurance or a retirement fund, like you say. So
we'll see where this takes us.
It was Data Lake, right? I actually heard. I was at a graduation Saturday on my birthday, right?
Oh, aren't we all? Many graduations going on right now.
Yeah. So I was there and talked with a friend of mine I hadn't seen for years, and he was talking about the data. He works for a larger utility company, and the amount of data they have, right? And how, I guess, big it is, how legacy it is, how they didn't think about it necessarily when they started dumping it into these tables. And he's just saying, like, now I guess they just export it all to a data lake. And I'm like, look at that, data lakes. We were just talking about, well, I guess we weren't just talking about that yesterday on the podcast. So,
well, it is something that's interesting because I've been learning a little bit about it, because getting back into Amazon Web Services and learning about their databases and their storage patterns that they have available and that are popular now to use. And data lakes, actually, I think I've heard of it before, but I've never really spent a lot of time on an implementation or really doing a lot of research or study about it. So it's actually kind of interesting to kind of see how it's kind of it's sort of an easy concept to understand. And I think you described it best by just dump your data in just to one big bucket or one big place, right? And to just not worry about having it fit a schema, but then think about how you can maybe categorize or maybe apply a little bit of metadata to it so that you can know exactly what's going in. Because if you just feed data into a bucket or a system and you have no idea what it is, then that's going to become, well, I guess what they like to call a data swamp.
Do they really call it a data swamp?
They do. Because all murky and you don't know what's there.
You have no idea what's in this thing. Yeah. Okay.
So when you ingest data, you do need to figure out some ways to understand what type of data is coming in and provide some metadata along with that, and to whether or not, if you store that in, let's say.
And when we say data lake, what are we throwing in there? Like JSON object, like somewhat a structured object, but without adhering to a specific schema and having to scratch our head and say, well, every object has to have these 15 properties, and if it doesn't, if we add one later, who knows? So is it the idea that it's still kind of key value-esque document style data, or what?
It's a good question, because does it have to be? Could it be any type of data? Does it have to be data that you have to read as in text or some type of binary format that you can actually read and process? Or I'm sorry, binary, but could it actually be images or video or audio?
And that's like normally when we think of data in a database, whether we think in terms of documents, whether we think of in terms of key value, I mean, if it's a relational database, it's still key value. It's just called a column in a row, right? It's still, you've got a key.
Ooh, I know, Tim. No? I don't know about that.
But no, I'm saying then you have structured, you have more complex documents. But even if you're taking things from old relational databases, you can still look at it as if it's
from key value perspective. That's correct. Yes.
And then you can say, well, key value is essentially a really simple document that's one level. All right. So as long as this data lake, if I'm throwing in, if the amount of structure I'm told to put on this is just, it needs to be a document style object, right? You've got keys, you've got values. Those values maybe those values could be images, right? Maybe they could, but there's and keys can have nested keys.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So when you've seen this, have you, because you deal with a lot of audio in your business, like would you treat audio as like a data source in a data lake? that then you could then maybe read in or transcribe or transcode, I guess it would
Be
be.
it'd be interesting. I mean, we've thought of things, there's obviously thoughts around transcribing and pulling value from the
Hmm.
audio. Um, what level of recordings we have kind of depends on the customer preference, and
Yeah.
there's different.
Or could you have like I would say mini lakes per customer that you basically collect all the data pertaining to that customer to that account that then you can then provide to the customer in a way to different ways to search it, index it, be able
Yeah,
to learn from that data.
and for sure, if you add properties to recordings, right? Like, hey, here were
Hmm.
good calls, here were bad calls, here's calls that had the outcomes that I want. Then being able to get that audio data from it and perhaps further processing that audio data to gain insights could be useful. But it feels to me like still you'd be taking the audio, then you'd be turning it into a more usable form, a transcription or sentiment analysis or something like that, that then would give you what amounts to a document, right?
Yeah.
Key value, or even a hierarchy of nested objects, but some type of very simple document style format that then would be associated, I guess, with that. But what are you finding with data lakes?
No, I'm just finding it super interesting because as we talked about many times in the show, I have a lot of experience regarding to databases. That's where I started my career, is working on databases and being a programmer, and always being around databases in almost every job that I had. And as developers, it's kind. I don't know if you can be a developer and not be interact with a database in some way.
It feels like it'd be difficult, and I must say I did notice that just last week, hours mere hours after the show last week, on Microsoft LinkedIn, you were reposting a job offer from the
Oh
company that you
yeah.
started at. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I thought it would, just spread a little good karma around. Yeah, so I saw that my first company that I worked for is hiring, and so it was actually for a .NET engineering position. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I don't do .NET anymore, but that's what which is very interesting because when they were just moving to .NET when I was there. Like I did a little bit of ASP.NET work with them, and all their databases weren't SQL 2000 databases, but they were starting to slowly start to kind of introduce that and bring that in. They were still on the legacy Progress, 4GL or Progress database that they were running most of their infrastructure on, but they were slowly moving into .NET, and now they're pretty much a full .NET shop. So it's kind of interesting to kind of see their
And
transition to
hiring
that.
a .NET developer, right?
Yep,
That's what I saw.
yep.
But
I
not
think
you. But not
not
you.
me. No,
No.
not me.
Okay.
Well, like I said, I have good experience. Like I said, I talked about that where I look back at that first job and taught me a lot of good memories, a lot of good experiences from that. But I don't like to really spend time in the past. Tim, I like to move forward, like to look at future
Like a shark.
opportunities.
Like a
Yeah,
shark,
yeah.
right?
Don't look back. Don't look
Can't
back.
swim backwards. Just forward. Just forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the reason why I brought this data lakes is it is kind of interesting because it's I've had a lot of experience working with different types of databases. I spend more recently spending more time with like NoSQL or key value or also document style databases, which you've had a good amount spending time with too, and not doing as much relational databases. But thinking about a data lake is basically like a combination of all of them. Where you can combine relational databases
Right. Because the idea is
or
you throw structured data, but schemaless data
or you
into it,
don't
right?
worry about yes, or you
You
don't worry about the schema at first. Like
right.
you probably do want to. Definitely need to have some type of when you ingest the data, you need to have some way to categorize or to provide some metadata around it, so you know kind of what that data is. So when you build your queries later on, you'll know what you're looking for. You'll know what data sources are, and you know what's available in those data sources. But thinking about your lake is basically a combination of all your different types of data. So that could be relational databases in like a MySQL database or Postgres or SQL Server. It could be a key value. It could be a Redis database.
And the idea is you can query once you push it all to the lake, you can kind of query across those concerns in a
Yeah.
way that you wouldn't. Like if I have some data in Redis, I have some data in a document store, Mongo, Couch, whatever. I've got some data in my relational database. Relating that data
Hmm.
requires code a lot of times, right? It
Yeah.
requires, hey, I'm gonna query this on the relational database. I'm gonna get back something that's an ID that then I go pull something maybe from Redis because I don't know why we Redis is a weird one because it's generally in memory. So I'm not sure why we'd have persistent data there. But anyway, we pull something from Redis and then we get more data back and then we go find the same key in a document store, and then depending on your document store, sometimes just getting documents that are related, whether or not your document database supports the idea of relationships and traversing them depends on what document store you're using. So maybe you have to pull back a document, find an ID, and then go fetch another document. So you're saying if I throw all this in a lake, the idea is I should be able to create some type of structured query that says, hey, find these type of things with this ID, and then also find these other type of things and give me a view that kind of combines them all. And I don't
Mhm.
have to worry about the fact that, I put those, that data was in my relational database and that data is in my document database. I can't actually, like, it requires code for me to bring those two things
Correct.
together and show you this. This
And
says, no, it doesn't.
and also think about how much time in the past you spent designing the schema or designing the structure even before worrying about getting the data in. I remember so many times like spending
I
just really
feel like you
stressing.
cared about that more than
Maybe I
I ever
do.
have.
I do. I overthink things. Well, I don't know, maybe because I
No,
fuck
no, it
yeah.
also be concerns too, right? Because you're more familiar on the database side. I could definitely be known in the past for making some decisions with databases that were not the most efficient, right?
Yeah,
And
because I've enjoyed many times designing databases and figuring out what the schema is, kind of planning, starting off with maybe like say, initial spec or user stories and thinking about how the application is going to be developed, and then designing a schema for the data that's going to for that application. But then that will also take a huge amount of time and also a huge amount of pressure to get it right, especially if you're going to be doing it for a client.
right,
Right. So if you're
right.
doing a new application for a client, and I did, this both of us have done in the past, or, designing maybe like um, you know, not a what's a greenfield project, I guess it would be.
Yeah.
It doesn't have an existing code base, and you're kind of starting off with fresh, and you're starting off with a new data structure. And there's a lot of pressure there because I have had many experiences in the past too. Once you, let's say, either adopting an old system and trying to transition it into adding some additional functionality to it, or maybe you've had to do some migrations and to transform the database in some way to change the schema, that can take a huge amount of work. So if you deal with a bad database design, it could definitely cause you a lot of trouble and a lot of stress down the road. So maybe I've always kind of put too much thought into that and put too much kind of pressure on myself to get it right the first time. But think about as us developers, that really right to do? Because really should be thinking about kind of smaller pieces, building it into kind of modular pieces that then when we do refactoring, it's actually easier. So maybe going back to the data lakes, not stressing too much about that initial schema or how you're going to be storing the structure of the data, as long as it does have some structure, as long as you know what it is. But then you could always then how you're going to be then querying that data. Then you can then figure out what's going to be the schema of that query. How what's going to be what type of data are you looking to get back, and then you could figure out that later on.
And I think on one hand, it's like maybe the issue, and I probably approach the database side of things a little bit more as an implementation detail that can change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though I recognize the fact that that's not always as easy as I may make it seem when I say it's an implementation detail, right? Changing a database schema for a relational database can be very difficult. That can be a huge migration, right? And sometimes you run yourself into problems where it's like, well, we should have thought about that differently because of the way that we're querying it now. And I think that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
what you're hinting at, right? Your data has to be right for whatever you're trying to do with it right now.
Yep.
But you don't maybe have to worry as much with tools like this. You don't maybe have to worry as much about, well, how am I going to want to query this in the future? And am I designing this structure and the schema in a way that works for what I think I might, but it's still fuzzy because I don't know. And when we really try to solve for the fuzzy that we don't know, that gets difficult because, hey, we don't know. That's the point. We don't know. So if you can just say, well, I'm gonna use a schema that works for right now, and then if I push this data out to this more abstract concept and just say, I'm just gonna, because that's how the data lakes normally work, right? You're storing it someplace, but you're pushing that data out into a data lake, right? Or no?
Correct. Well, or you mean it where you have, let's say, a database that's concern has maybe one concern with the for
Right.
one application,
Right.
and so it
Yeah.
kind of yep,
This is the database that runs this web app.
yeah,
I'm going to store it in a SQL database, or like you say, or a document database, or
yeah,
whatever works for my purposes
yeah.
for this. And then I'm going to push it to this data lake. So that secondary purpose, when we a year later scratch our head and say, hey, we got a lot of data. Wouldn't it be cool if we could, and then we look at our schema in our
Hmm.
relational database, or we go, oh, that'd be an easy query for a relational database. But guess what? We said that didn't matter because we wanted to be able to evolve the schema over time and not be really bound to it. So we throw it in a document store that doesn't have a great performance for the aggregate functions you're asking me for.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
if we're also pushing it out into this notion of a data lake, then we can say, well, yeah, we can actually just kind of tell the lake, I guess. And I'm less familiar with all this than you are. And as you're kind of figuring it out, right, and reading up on it, my understanding is then you kind of tell the lake, all right, this is how I want to look at the data. It is designed however they're designed to then do some indexing, do some changes, figure out how to then let your query actually be something you can run, instead of you saying, oh, well, we can never run that query. It's not
Yeah.
performant because of the structure that we chose at the beginning 3 years ago when we had no idea we were going to do this.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it is appetizing to companies that deal with a lot of data. They can say, well, I store the data in a way that is good for this purpose. That is our main, it's the thing that we're doing. That's what we know we need. We need performance for this use. We can throw it out into this lake, and one day, yeah, we can say, we can use it in a different way. And we don't have to worry about the fact that our primary storage does not support looking at it that way at all.
Yeah.
So,
It provides just like we talk about, making our applications modular or working with components instead of, or
mhm.
working with distributed rather than monolithic, or I don't know. There are some pros to cons of working with say monolithic, but it's like if you're going to be making your application more in separate pieces that then kind of work together, it's easier to change over time, right? Because you're just
Right,
changing
right,
the smaller pieces. So thinking about your data in that way.
right. Yeah, let's just make it work for this,
Yeah.
and
Which is
knowing
for
that,
me is kind of a new concept. That's why I kind
yeah,
of find this is fascinating because traditionally, like I said, how I learned about databases and grew up on them and my whole career, I've been mostly just dealing with either relational databases, then moving into a NoSQL and document style databases, but you're still dealing with like, let's say one data source for your system, for your application, and then you're trying to get the schema right, and you're trying to make sure you're kind of making sure that it's solving your use case that you're trying to apply to it, but also you want to make sure it's going to be extendable in the future. And this kind of gives you the best of both worlds, where like so you can still design it for that use case or for that specific application, but then it gives you flexibility down the road when you actually need to, let's say, do something else with that data, provide reports, provide
right,
analytics,
right.
have a better understanding of that. Or let's say, and what now is all the hot thing is to develop your own maybe model, your own language model out of it. Your own, do some
Yeah, throws.
learning about that data, so then you can then start to write some other applications built on that data. You know, so I mean, I think it's pretty fascinating. So you this came up with your a former a friend, or he
An
said,
old friend, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and he just brought it up. He just said, "Oh, he's just got."
Yeah, well, we're talking about the data that a large utility
Mhm,
company would have to use, and I think it was about meter data and where they were putting it,
mhm.
and the fact that, well, if you're putting that in a relational database, that's going to get pretty big pretty fast,
Yeah.
and then any change is going to be very very difficult.
Mhm,
So I think the idea was they're also throwing it into a data lake where maybe they can do better querying of it, in the future without having to say, well, how do we add this data, or how do we change these columns? How do we change the schema? Because
mhm,
it's really hard to now because there's so much of it, right? And I also think is not a use for the notion of data lakes. This idea sometimes whatever your primary storage is only for so long. Like if I am, say, collecting, say it's let's say parking meters, right? I'm doing some checking of that, and we're storing. When people put a quarter in, let's say they're smart parking meters in a city installation, right? Like each meter, when someone parks there, when they put a quarter in there, there's sensors that tell you if they're parked there and if they're not. All that data.
mhm. Yeah.
And we would look at it and say, all right, we can model this, and it needs to be performant. So it may be a relational database to start with, and we're gonna push rows in it. then maybe we say, well, we only actually in the relational database, because when you're going out and asking the question of where are people parking, you really only care about the last 6 months, or you really only care about the last year or so, right? For any type of normal report, like for the day-to-day usage, where you're just like, well, what parking meters, because this is going to inform us. If there's a lot of parking on this street, then maybe we need to be more mindful of repairs to the road and the infrastructure there, and we can see those traffic patterns. So that day-to-day usage, you're talking weeks, months, no more than a year. So maybe you say we only store this data in the relational database for a year, but we do store all the historical data in something else that we can then just have a little bit more freedom in how we query and how we relate it to other data sources, because maybe we also have traffic light data, maybe you also have repair data, and we throw all of that historically into a data lake, and then we can get longer range queries done there, but they're not the queries that you need for your day-to-day operations. Those happen and are in a very fixed, performant, tuned to this specific use case storage system, which because we have the lake where we can throw stuff, we don't have to worry about keeping it forever, because that's the problem with tables.
Yeah.
When you have 4 or 5 million rows, you can't just be like, oh, let's add an index to this, because that would make queries faster, because you can't. It would take forever.
Yeah,
So.
the space issue, the space requirement issue for a relational database, that was something I remember. That was just once that database starts to get substantially large, and especially back in the day when servers weren't as I'd say definitely not as large and powerful as they are today, but just storing large amounts of data in let's say a single database, or if let's say the data gets too large, you have to consider, oh, should we shard this and separate it out to separate database and divide our database up and figure out which tables need to be in which one, and then to modify our queries for that. I'm like, oh, that was a huge
Modify
pain.
your queries, understand how to deal with sharding, or shard because you have to know your queries. So sharding it actually doesn't make your queries less performant, right? All that kind of fun stuff.
So it's interesting now with the cloud provider, especially with scaling relational databases, it becomes much more easier to deal with those types of issues, and just offload that to the cloud providers to kind of let them deal with the whole space issues and distributing that out to multiple servers. One thing I did learn, though, from dealing with implementing data lakes with Amazon Web Services, how you could just use S3 as like a data store. And that was something I never considered, because you and I use S3 a lot with this podcast, right? You upload the podcast to
holds
the MP3 file up there, and that's where we host our audio files, right? And that's traditionally what I've always considered S3 to be for, let's say.
But S3 is essentially a key value store.
Well, it's it's an object store. You can still you are storing your files as objects, right?
Right.
And you reference those objects has a name or identifier to it, right? So that's where you think about the key
value.
That key's associated with an object.
Yep.
But then you could just store log files, because the example that you provided, the traffic is, or the metered examples, right?
Yeah.
Basically storing log information, right? Just like a time, the amount, maybe like a start and end time. And you're just stealing that very basic information. You could just dump that in just individual text files.
Right. Because if you dumped it as like either JSON or maybe even CSV, right? You can dump that into S3, and then you can use the data lake tooling to actually query that and find it, because it understands how to parse and understand the structure of those text files. You can do the same thing with HTTP requests, I think. Like your Apache request logs and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah, you could just toss them into S3 and then mine it for
that was something I never considered, using S3 as a data source for a database, in a sense, or for data query, in a sense.
It's weird, because it's not so much of a database. It is just data that you're throwing in there.
Yeah.
And now I'm saying we would mine it. Is that the wrong terminology? Since we should also just admit here, if someone has worked with data lakes before and is like in the big data industry, they are probably hating this right now. They're probably like, this is like,
well, that's the whole point of the show. Honestly, this is the show, especially for me. It's for me to bring up things that I'm learning about. I'm like, oh yeah, Tim, what do you think about this?
Really be like, I can't believe they're so stupid. That's the point of this show, is for people to scream into their computer, you idiots. Anyway, so but I've been saying like we mine a lake for data. Is there
Yeah.
is there a better term? Is it fishing? Do we go fishing?
That's a good
Do you
point.
throw a net through the thing? I mean, what do you dredge the lake? What do we do?
Well,
How do we get
you're
data?
still querying, you're still looking for data, you're still analyzing it, right? So it's
Right, but what's the right lingo? Because it's not mine it. And is it
may not be
gonna
mining. Yeah, well,
what's the
mining.
lake lingo?
Well, depending if you are we if you're doing anything with crypto, you know, that would
Yeah,
definitely be a different type of mining. But
that's a different type of mining. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. It was something that was I was learning about the past couple of weeks as I've been getting into back into Amazon Web Services and learning about their infrastructure and learning about all the different APIs and services that they provide for this type for data and databases. And learning about this for the first time was like really opened my eyes to think about the past of how I've used databases and thinking about how like yeah, I'll still continue to use relational database when it's appropriate, but I won't. It almost makes me stress a little bit less. We're thinking, oh,
Mm.
okay, you don't have to get that one database perfect for your application, right? You could definitely use maybe one type of database for one part of your application, another database for a different part of your application, and then later on you could just combine them together in a data lake, and it's not really that big of a deal.
Because
It provides you a lot of
it's really the
flexibility.
tooling that is provided for you, right? Because
Yeah,
some of that things you could probably done before, but now there's tools that make it easy.
yeah.
And even as you bring up this show, right? So if we took this show and transcribed every show, ran it through some type of AI to say, hey, bring me out the topics and the times that those topics existed, took the markdown that we have that powers the site, which basically is metadata for the shows,
Hmm.
and each one of them would have the show link, right? It
Yeah.
each one episode what 1, 2, 3, and then we just took all that data and threw it into S3. We should be able to use some tools to kind of relate it and find it and say like, hey, look at the transcripts and find wherever we talked about this, but then bring me back the metadata for each one of those shows.
Hmm.
Show me the title. And it's like, well, how do you know the title? Well, because the transcript was for episode 60 and you want the title for episode 60. Okay, I see that's a different type of document that relates that. We should just be able to throw it all in there and say, all right, now use one to look up the other. And I get, am I right there
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
what we could possibly do?
It would take a good amount of work, that a good amount of investment. But I don't know. Maybe if we want it, like we've been talking about 10xing the show, and maybe
Oh, yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it will require. I mean, 10xing does not just happen by itself. You have to put a
Doesn't
little bit of
it?
work in for it.
It takes 1 and 2 and 3xing and then 4 and 5. Then eventually you get to 10xing. So what
Yeah.
I want an update though. Like, are we sending out? Are we responding to job applications? It's
So
June.
it's super super interesting. I did send out one because I'll
One
tell you why.
application.
And yes, one application because that was my goal. Was like okay, June 5th. I was gonna like that's where I had my mind. I was gonna start doing it, and like as we talked about last week, I was gonna start with local companies and see if I can get some feedback. But it's interesting though what we ended with last show at the very end
Very
is
end.
alluding to the role or position that I'm going to be looking for, which it's interesting. And I just kind of came to this for the past, let's say, a couple of weeks here, and mostly because I've been learning a lot about Amazon Web Service. Also, figure okay, maybe I should look into getting certified with Amazon because that would also be a nice way for me coming out of academia to get back into the industry and kind of show that I actually know a few things to get certified. Even though if I was working full time in the industry, you don't need to get certified to get a job, but I think that would be kind of a nice kind of step for me to kind of to do as I kind of transition out. But I was thinking about the different roles that I would take or the roles I would be looking for. And over the past couple of months, as we've been talking and thinking about what I was going to be doing this summer and looking for different opportunities, I went back to, what am I? Well, I'm a full stack developer, right? And if I look at myself, that's kind of traditionally that is what I have been, right? I like the back end. I like the front end. I've actually spent a little bit more. Well, it's interesting. I started my career more in the back end, dealing with databases, dealing with server side applications, and then transitioned into more front side because I liked the design. And I tell my students when I teach my classes, the reason why I'm teaching these classes, these web design classes, web development classes, because I like web design and web development because it gives me the best of both worlds. I could deal with the design, the creative side of it from the front end, and then deal with the technical side of like the back end or the coding or databases like we were talking about.
Right.
I like both, right? But I also acknowledge I may not be the best at one of those domains, right? And maybe I will never be the best at one of those big, especially if I, if I would I want to if somebody came to me and said, if I was working on a project, okay, design me an API, could I do it? Yeah, I could do it a little bit, but would I be better hiring somebody like you to design an API who you've been doing a lot more APIs for your career and would be able to approach it from a lot more experience? Absolutely. Right. So I think there's, but I do like learning about everything and learning how
Right.
I can apply it within the projects that I'm working on. So I consider myself as being a full stack developer, and that's kind of what I would be especially if I wasn't going to be teaching full time and working full time. That's the type of position I would be. Then I was also thinking about my age. I'm kind of not a young chicken anymore. I'm kind of an old guy, a little bit older than you.
A little bit older than me.
Trying to stay
Who,
young.
for the record, is not an old guy. I mean, I
trying
am
to stay young. But I realized, okay, if I'm going to go back in the industry, then what kind of also because of my age and like, oh man, I'd actually be like a senior developer or lead developer. It's like, but then I'm like, would I be comfortable doing
Wait,
that?
we
'Cause I'm
don't
like,
we don't just say you're a senior developer because you're old. You know that, right?
well, I know, but okay, but based on my experience, no, because I do not just in academia, but before academia, I have a lot of industry experiences. So I would add up the years of my experience. It's up there. It's close to 10. So it's like that should be a senior level developer, right? You would say that like over definitely what 5 to 7 years, getting over that 7-year mark. How would you classify a senior developer from like
Well,
say
that's
just purely based on experience?
on experience. That's a
Yes.
great question. That
Okay.
could be
Let's start with
that
that
could be an entire
because
show.
that's where I started because I was like, okay, if I'm going to go
I
looking
feel
for
like
a
where we're going
position,
to is like why when I go on Microsoft LinkedIn
no,
and
we will get there, Tim. You're jumping
and
ahead. You're
look
jumping
at
ahead.
your graphical image across.
Which you can't take. I know it just drives
I'm,
you crazy to see
I'm seeing
that.
you're saying you're an experienced full stack web developer, but there's also something else there. And I feel like that's what we're getting to. I think
Yes,
that's what we're getting to.
yes. It's a
So,
story, Tim. I'm trying to
but
build a story here.
this is good. This is good because the how do you consider yourself a senior developer is fascinating, right? And this could probably take the rest of the show. Because on one hand, I'm puzzling over some of these things because we use those titles. We use senior or principal, and
Mhm.
I saw pyramid the other day, and I have no idea what half. I didn't know we used half these titles in the industry, and I don't know which one's higher than which one. There's like developer, the junior developer, senior
Mhm.
developer, lead developer, then
Yeah,
principal developer, and
when I first started off a junior programmer, that was my first title out of
okay,
college.
yeah,
And they said, what they wanted me, not their goal, they told me up front, you have to get out of this title within your first year, and preferably before your first year.
and did you
So
say
if you,
how do I do that?
because we want to have just programmers or senior programmers or lead programmers. We want to kind of start to level you up as fast as possible because we don't want to have junior developers team. And they told me
So
that up front. It's like,
they told
okay,
you that, but
I'm
then
for that. But
what
it's
bumped
like,
you?
well, I had to show over the year. I had to show, it's just so long ago, but I had to
Mhm.
actually be able to, let's say, commit code without bringing up too many issues, right? I had to get, let's say, 1 or 2 performance reviews
Mhm.
to be able to say, like, okay, you are performing well. You're, the code that you're submitting. We're not, when you're doing the code review, we're not having to come back to you with too many issues because junior developers, that's one thing that you'll see. And I
Mhm.
did it myself. When you do those initial submits, you're not really testing your own code or reviewing your own code, and there's going to be errors, going to be issues also because I did a lot of interaction with databases, and if I'm doing changing data in the database and I'm changing in the wrong way, or maybe I'm not validating data in the correct ways, right? I'm going to get pushed back on a lot of the code I was spending. That's what was happening initially when I first, let's say, the first 3 to 6 months working on the job. Then once you get within that position, get more comfortable within that type of position, then they want you, and you say that you do the code reviews, and they find that you're doing a better job and submitting better commits and updates, and then you're able to level up.
So less significant changes needed. Code reviews probably still find issues, but not like, oh
L-
wow, no, you can't do this at all.
Less management from the senior developers, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. But that's interesting too.
Or you're more of an independent developer in a team rather than relying on other developers to making sure that the work that you're doing is satisfactory for that team.
Right. So it's a little bit more trust that you
Yeah.
can just take it and run with it on your own. I mean, I'm hoping they never pulled out the support of the peer review, because that's important whether
No,
you're a senior
that
developer
was
or
always
not,
no.
right?
Then that's always was there. But
Yeah.
let's say, but if they come back to you with like 20 different, let's say 20 different changes, 20 different issues in your code, if you can get that down to one or two,
Yeah.
that was the primary the goal. Yeah.
What's interesting to me there is there's two things. There's two things there that touches on. One, you getting familiar with the code standards and the
Mm-hmm.
philosophy of the specific code base that you're working on. So
Mm-hmm.
there is, of course, like you could hire a senior developer and still need that for the first 6 months, where
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, oh, we're using this framework. I never used this framework before, or oh, we're using this technique. Never used this technique before. I need to understand that. I understand other techniques. You would think that a senior developer would get up to speed faster, but there's still a similar thing that is just you getting familiar with the domain, the existing code base when you're brought onto a new team.
Yeah.
But there's also the fact that, okay, we would think, if this was your first job in the real world, out of a computer science or a programming course, right, that now you've seen the real world, you've had some more experience, and you're not making the same kind of naive mistakes that, yeah, you understand how code works, but you don't understand how to protect against some things, and how to code a little bit defensively, or how to even test your own code if you're not
Mm-hmm.
in test driven development
Yeah.
before. All right, you're better at that now too.
Yeah.
So okay, fine. So you went from junior to developer. Then it gets to me a little bit more fuzzy, because how do you go from developer to senior developer? Because if all it is you've gotten better, well, different people get better different ways and at a faster pace. And I feel like a lot of times we've had to invent these titles, because you're like, well, how do we tell Bob that he's better? Well, we've got to give him a promotion. Well, we didn't fire anybody ahead of him, right? Like if you look at the org
Mm-hmm.
chart, there's a
Yeah.
bunch of squares, and there's a bunch of names, and there's none of them don't have a name in them. So we don't have a thing for him to go higher. So we will invent a new thing. He's now a senior vice president of something, right? It's like, but why? Well, because he was here longer. Okay, so we just use that as a way to say, oh, you've done better, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I find weird about those titles, and especially when I saw this huge pyramid that someone showed at PHP Tech, and I'm like, I didn't even know
Why
we
were they
had
showing
all
it?
the.
So what was the context? What were
Oh,
they showing
the context was great. I mean, the talk was great. It was Jeremy Limbaum does this talk. I don't know if it was his first one, but he's a great speaker. Loved going. I went to a conference he held years ago down in Phoenix, Arizona, called Just PHP. It was a 1-day conference that took place in a comedy club. An improv club was the
Nice.
venue. So we did some of that too as part of the conference, and it was really fun. We're supposed to
Mhm.
our slides were supposed to have a little bit of humor in them, and so it was great 1-day local conference. So he's a great speaker. He used to work at AWS, McGraw Hill. I think he now works at GoDaddy. And the idea of the talk was I think the title was how to diagram like a principal engineer. And in whatever pyramid he had, I think principal was the top. And I didn't even realize that in terms of title, that like we were accepting, I don't know, maybe there's a senior principal. I don't know. Even better, a bester principal developer. But the idea was, let's show you, because a developer in a leadership role needs to be able to express ideas to other developers and to even a non-technical audience. One way to do that a lot of times is to visually represent how things work. So let's talk about some tools and techniques like UML and then things like, well, you could use something like Miro to do it. You could use something like I forget what the little one is, that Glyphy, I think, is embedded in Confluence a lot. You could use something like Plant UML, or one that he showed, and I forget what the title of it was. It was an interestingly named project where you describe the things. You like with text describe this diagram, and it just goes, oh, I'll build it for you. And I love those because it means I don't have to click, drag to make a change. I just have to express and code the relationship, and then you go visually, oh, I see how that works. So that was the idea, is how to level up on that skill, which a lot of times, yes, taking on new skills is what conveys, yep, you're a senior developer. but that's all a rabbit trail in the fact that we can box it like, are you a junior developer or a senior developer? But the industry and practically titles have said, wow, we have so much other titles that I can't even tell you what makes what. But if when we say, are you a senior developer, meaning I'm going to hire you, you're going to hit the ground running, you
Hmm.
kind of know what you're doing. The thing to me that is kind of that indicator that you're there. And it's also interesting being a contractor, right? Because when did I become a senior developer? When I changed it to say I'm a senior developer, right? That's when it happened. I was like, you know what? I think I'm a senior developer now. So, what is the thing that says you can be that? I would attest it is being able to explain concepts to other developers and them understand it. Being
So to
able,
have some leadership like functionality to that.
it's not so much the leadership like where you're gonna, but it is, I think, more if I understand. It's one thing for me to understand the concept enough to be able to do it, right? And the first step is like, it's one thing for me to be able to understand the concept. You throw a new programming concept at somebody and it's going to take them perhaps a while to go, oh, I see how that works, I can
Hmm.
understand how that
Yeah.
works, and now I am ready to actually, yeah, I can write code where I'm not always scratching my head saying, wait, is that the right way? No, I'm familiar with this. I get it. And that's like, you throw something new at somebody like, hey, here's an ORM. This is how object relational mapping works. This is the specific
Yeah.
library that we're using. Oh, now I got to stop thinking of data as a table that is basically an object that has properties of the same.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking of it more like, oh, it's mapped. So there's, all right, it's a real. So once you get that concept, you're like, oh, I get it. Now the next step is not only can you work in that concept, but can you take somebody and say, let me help you realize it. And if you can
Yeah.
explain it and you can communicate in a way that explains complex ideas to people who do not understand them yet, I think you've crossed that bound. Another developer that I work with would say it is when you can review code in a meaningful way for another developer. And I think that those
I'd agree with that.
definitions
Yeah.
are very, very intertwined. Because if
And
I can show you what you need to improve, then I'm explaining I'm somehow being able to communicate complex concepts.
and when I say leadership, I meant not as leadership as in convey this programmer needs to work on this, as in dictating what they should be working on. I meant as in
Right, right.
like you just said. So if one developer is working on a problem and they're not sure how to go about it or how to work with the code base or how to just how to move forward with it, they would be able to come to you and then you would be able to provide some advisement, some
Yeah, and
mentorship.
I think that's
And
actually
I do
something.
consider that part of leadership in a sense. That's the
Yeah.
best part of leadership, right? That's where you can kind of just lead them in the right direction, right? You're not like being an overarching manager of their work, but you're just kind of helping them lead them in the right direction.
And I think too, if I'm remembering the conversation I had correctly, that was one of the other things that came out of some of these similar conversations I have with the team is that when another developer comes to you for help, that's an indicator that you're a senior developer. When other people are coming and asking you. Now, that may not be a great indicator if you have a very, very, very junior team.
Hmm.
And like, but I think in that case, you know that you're like, you're coming to me, but I don't know it either, right? So we'll just try to figure it out together. But when other developers come to you, that's another signal of, oh, yep,
Yeah.
there's been a change here. And I think they're all related, right? It's this idea, can you, why are they coming to you? Because they trust that you can communicate and grasp and understand, and then to them help them understand a complex concept. Why is your code review valuable? Because same thing. Why, and so I think it's all intertwined there. It's one of those things where it's really hard just to say, oh, these are the boxes that you check off, and now you're a senior developer.
Yeah. So thinking about like I said, this all came about because of the type of position I'm looking at. And there are a lot of senior developer, senior full stack developer positions I was looking at and kind of just seeing what would be the requirements of that role. And I was trying to envision myself in that role, kind of stepping into that position, stepping into it within a new company and providing those types of things to the company. And what we were talking about here, I could definitely do. I could definitely see myself doing, but could I do it on day one? Could I do it within the first week? Right? Because coming out of academia, not working within a team, full time within the company, not going, it's much easier. Let's say if you're working in one company and then transition to another company, you're still staying as long, within relatively the same technical domain, right? Even though I've been teaching a lot of these things. I haven't worked with them, let's say, within a team and a full-time team in a very, very long time. So it would take me a little bit of time to kind of get comfortable, get up to speed with the right way that the team works, with the right way that, we talk about the code base, learning the infrastructure, and I feel like I'd be a little bit of a disadvantage because I think it would take me a little bit longer. And let's say time could just be, could be the month, could be the first, I don't know, 2 to 3 months. I don't know, depending on the company and the complexity of the situation. But I would probably be slower than somebody else who would be coming from a different company. Right. So that was something I was thinking about and something I was just kind of trying to figure out,
And
if
most
I
of
would
that
be
is just you're feeling that because of your absence from industry.
correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, because I'm envisioning myself, so when I, in an interview situation, kind of talking about my past experience, I definitely talk a lot about my past experience, both in academia and outside of academia. But the span, because I've been in academia for close to 10 years now, is so vast. And I haven't done too much work. Initially, when I was in academia, I did a little bit of contract consulting in the beginning, but then that definitely petered out because it was by choice because focused on grad work and teaching, everything like that. So it's been a long time since I've been in that situation. So, like I said, I would feel like I would be a little bit at a disadvantage of that. So I kind of think about what were some other roles that would be, maybe I could kind of get into. Also think about what do I want to do? Because I do love to code. Like I said, we talked about from the full stack perspective, I like working the front end, the back end. But where I'm finding myself in, I really do like the design, not just design from the front end, but design from a system perspective. Thinking about, what is that infrastructure? What are all the pieces? What are all the tools you have to work with? And what's the best way to work with them? So learning about, getting back into Amazon Web Services and thinking about the certifications, there is a certification, this Solutions Architect certification. And it reminded me of the fact that the last time I was thinking about getting certified was back in the Microsoft days, because Microsoft had
the MCSE, right?
Yeah. So they had their own kind of solutions architect or certified engineer. I guess what Microsoft certified engineer. Is
Yeah,
that what it was?
Microsoft. Yep.
So I was back when I was doing a lot of .NET work. I was totally considering that. I said, if I'm going to stay within the .NET kind of field, this is probably should be a route that I would go, but decide to take a different path with that. But then, okay, so Amazon has this solutions architect. And then when I did some searching, oh, well, Google has they have like a customer architect or customer engineer or something like they have a different role or different profile. Microsoft has, similar solution architect roles now. And so what is this role? And I kind of dug into that a little bit more. And it's really a role that's very people facing, right? Or very client facing. So you'd be working with the client. It either could be from a pre-sales, post-sales type of relationship where you're going to be they're going to be bringing you their problem. And then you're going to be thinking about what is the best way that they could solve their problem using the platform that you are supporting. And think about what is that job like and what is that relationship like? And if I was in an interview for that position, I could, once I had the certification, I could prove that I actually knew what I need to know about the platform from a customer or from a conversational, from a consulting perspective. I could definitely do that. Right. And do that on day one.
Right.
And and then think about the value that I could bring within, let's say, the first day, the first week. I'd be totally comfortable with doing that. So I'm thinking that's where I was leading into thinking about, okay, lean into your strengths or where you actually want to go. Because I still want to code, I still want to program, I still want to design. Those are things I still want to do. But do I feel like I need to do them on level as being a full-time developer within a development team? And maybe I should just be leveraging the strengths and my skills that I've actually developed through academia by teaching and talking to people and working in mentorship, and then bring that in with my previous experience in the industry by doing more architecting and designing and kind of bring those together. So it's interesting to think about all the different positions, and it's fascinating. You go into Indeed and you do a solutions architect.
Yeah.
So many companies have this now. I'm like, okay, this is kind of a crazy thing because you asked me how many jobs that I've applied for. Well, I wanted to start with just local companies. That was my goal, starting in June. And then kind of while I'm working on getting certified, I did get my first certification. I did take my first test this week. That's one thing I did. I did the, the cloud practitioner for Amazon's. They're kind of entry level.
Oh boy.
And I was considering just doing the solutions architect one. I was kind of studying for both of them. And I realized, okay, it's been a long time. So I took one of these type of tests or these type of certification tests. I was like, why don't I just do the first one, even though it's just an entry level one, I could just bypass it if I need to. But I did it this week, and actually it was a good experience because it kind of showed me kind of what the testing process is like and what to expect for the harder tests that I'll have to take. And so I did that this week. But then think about, what are the positions I want to apply to? So the company's escaping right now. As they're talking, I'm just thinking about the solution architect positions. I was thinking, looking at these in Lehigh Valley, they're Air Products.
Oh, okay.
Air Products has it's interesting. They had if you read the job description, they had like something like QE or Q. So they had like a weird name to it, but it was an architect position. It's more of a technical architect type position. But I looked at the job requirements, and it was a lot of web technologies that I've had a lot of experience working with.
Yeah.
They went to a lot, the database. There was SQL Server 2000. I was like, oh, okay. So it was like a lot of different technologies that I've used before in the past, and am using. And also Amazon Web Services. So it kind of fit all in line. And that was like the only company in Lehigh Valley that was offering a solutions architect position. So sent my application out, even though I think once I would have the certification, I think it would look a little bit better. So, but I wanted to kind of start that process. But look at the Lehigh Valley, there's not too much
Not a whole lot
from a solutions architect perspective. But if you look nationally,
oh yeah,
a ton. And almost every big company has like a type of architect position. You even saying your company has one.
Well, we do, but like I think what we call solutions architects are different than what you're looking at. But well, honestly, probably more in line with what AWS calls their solution architects. And I may be wrong here, but I think when you're a solution architect for AWS, what you do is you get paired with a customer.
Mm-hmm.
And like if I am a business that's trying to build on AWS, I say, hey, we're having a hard time understanding how we're going to do this. And a solutions architect comes in and says, oh, well, you could use a Lambda function to handle some of this stuff that you just don't need state for. You could host all this over. Oh, you've got containers. Let's use our Elastic container, which is our version of Kubernetes. And this is how that would work. And oh, you need data. Well, what type of data you need? Mm-hmm. We've got RDS. We've got all the different, and help you figure out how you're going to architect the infrastructure as a service that you're going to be getting from AWS. We have a role that's very similar to that, but realize like our customers are saying we want to connect with our customers are saying we want to use your platform to connect and have relationships with our customers. And we have, our data's over here. We have existing leads, or we have existing customer database. How do we get that into your system? Oh, we have a cadence where we always call people that, if I'm an account manager, I always call my best people or most valuable customers on Monday mornings. So how do we work that out so that is easy with your platform? And our solutions architects, I think, will come through and say, this is how you do it with our system. They're not talking about how you might integrate with our system, though we do have some APIs, and they may recommend some of those for more advanced stuff. But they'll come through and say, oh no, you can use this feature to do this. Very similar to the AWS model, only AWS is talking about infrastructure as a service. We're talking about customer relationships and using our platform to achieve that. So yeah, we have something that we call a solutions architect. It's not technical in terms of programming. It's technical in terms of how do you use our specific products from the user standpoint.
And there's a couple of positions too that I definitely would want to. I could definitely see would be nice kind of next steps too, being like a cloud architect or cloud engineer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they deal with the actual implementation, and that's actually what I really do want to do. Like actually, because I think that I would really super enjoy that, working with clients from more of a consulting standpoint, help them implement the solution rather than just provide them just the design and say, oh, here's the design. Here you go. Here's some resources, and you're off to it, right? But I do know that first step, though, dealing with customers, dealing with clients, that would be a good kind of first step to kind of get my foot back in the door.
Yeah,
and then that could lead me into actually building the relationships, and then transitioning into actually doing the actual implementation and helping customers and helping clients with that.
So that is why your LinkedIn profile says that you are a solutions architect and educator, an experienced solution architect and full stack web developer. So,
and because also back in the day, I did consider before everybody went remote and before we had Zoom, I did consider once one transition out of academia was to do back to corporate training.
Okay.
And that's, I could also see
myself like education.
enjoying. Yeah, I could also
Yeah.
see myself really, really enjoying that. But nowadays, I don't want to be doing that on Zooms. I don't want to be doing that virtually. I'm kind of not into that. Like I said, I do kind of want to, meet with people and kind of work. Even I don't, let's put it this way. I know if I'd be meeting with people and clients, I'm going to do mostly remotely and online.
Yeah.
But from a training perspective, because I went to a couple of these couple of professional classes. I think Microsoft was after their training centers.
Okay.
I went to a SQL Server class. I went to a .NET class, and so that was actually a really fun experience. Going to like a training center for like a week, and just say for 8 hours a day, you're just learning this one technology, and you're just kind of just pounding through it. I kind of really liked that, and I saw the instructor, and they're very knowledgeable in what they were teaching. I was like, oh, I could see myself doing that eventually. And that was but nowadays I don't think that's offered as much because there's so much.
I think it's just Zoom.
It's Zoom. And it's also, there's so many free online resources,
yeah.
so many videos, so many courses now that are available to you. It's now, I don't think it's a really great industry to get into unless you're going to be making the materials, which I don't know if I'd be the best at either. So,
right. If you're making that content and it's, I guess, better than everything else that's out there.
Yeah.
But if it's just like, oh yeah, we do that training too, I don't know that the trainings are selling that much anymore, because like you said, there's so much information you can find out there already online.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go to things like there's a couple big names in terms of training, like self-education. I'm forgetting some of them. Like I think there's one that's like Lydia or Lind. I don't know what it was.
Lynda.com.
Yeah, there's that.
That used to be LinkedIn bought that out, so now it's part of LinkedIn Learning.
Oh, is that LinkedIn? Okay. And there was a couple others like that where you could create content for it, and then be kind of an educator there. But it is like you say, it's very similar to what you're doing for your not live classes at NCC, where people are just watching it remotely. And if you can make money doing that, that's great. But it's not the same thing as it's not the same draw as that. Hey, let's get in a room and I can show a bunch of people how to do this, and I can feed off of the fact that I can see them learning. It's it's obviously not the same as that.
And the other thing that I really like about the solution architect kind of role, or what I've been learning about, is that it's client facing, it's customer facing. And that's
you're always trying to solve somebody else's problems.
The primary skill. And honestly, that's probably my best skill too. Like, even though I love technology and I love always learning about new technologies and how to implement it, but at the same time, though, I love working with people. And I kind of feel need to feel comfortable. I should just lean into that, not just feel like I need to go back into a cubicle, or not a cubicle, but say at my desk in front of front of a Zoom window working with other developers. Even though I could definitely see myself doing that, but honestly, I thought, okay, I could definitely do that, but would I be happy at that? And I probably wouldn't be. Over a year, 2 years, I wouldn't like that.
But you think you have the staying power in something where you're always talking with new
it could lead to other opportunities. Because one thing I would really like to do is just build relationships again. Get to know companies, get to know people working in the industry, and then that could lead to other opportunities, right?
Gotcha. So one application sent, yeah. Is that
yes,
accurate?
And then I need to decide. Like I say, what I'm really focused on now is I have this. I did the cloud practitioner certification. I'm taking a little bit of time for the next one, the solution architect. I also have a developer certification I want to take. So I'm trying to get those done.
Developer certification, huh?
Like an associate developer, yeah. So, but I thought, because I also think that would be one that I could probably knock out based on the projects I'm working on and be able to accomplish. But I want to really focus on that this month. So I'm looking at different opportunities, and if I see a job application open up that I feel like it could be a good fit for within this architect style position, that's what I would apply for. But I'm really just focusing on the certifications right now, and then because also I'm saying a lot of these job offers too are requiring it.
Now the big question is, though, as you sent in this application, how much of the application did you use ChatGPT to write?
None. I don't think anything.
None.
Well, the cover letter. I did ask for initial idea for a cover letter, and then I probably revised about half of it.
Did you point it to your profile or something and say like, "Hey, write a good profile or a cover letter"?
Well, this is based on this resume. Give me a cover letter. It did a crappy job, but at least it kind of got me started with it. Yeah.
So next week, I don't know. Is there a step 2 here? Was there a goal for week 2 or
I'm out of ideas at this
yeah?
point. We'll see how the week goes, but
You don't know what's going to come next week. So next week maybe we'll talk about I'm having to restart my Windows machine now in the morning to get it to recognize USB things. I'm like, this is why Mark left Windows or Linux for
yeah.
Windows. What's
Yeah.
happening with Windows now? And it's like it won't recognize this USB, my HDMI for my secondary monitor. I got to plug that. I'm not sure what's going on in the Windows world. And then for some reason, I just want to make things with my laser and sell them. And I don't understand why, because I won't make actual money.
Yep. That's a side hustle, right?
It's a side hustle, but it's like I don't know why I want to. Because like you look at it, you're like, oh well, yeah, you could make, yeah, you turn this in. All right, yeah, you could sell these because this is right here. Yeah. So like I got things like this. It's a wooden cover for a disc-bound notebook, right? You put the paper in, like
yeah.
What do you find?
I think it's because you're making because you like to make stuff you can.
I think that's it. I like the making, and then
Yeah.
I mean, I like making, then wanting to like, well, I could make more.
Yeah.
And then I could make them and people would appreciate them and sell them. But the truth is like, like you look on what something like that's going for in a marketplace, maybe $30-$40, something like that you could get. You know, your cost on building it is what about maybe $10? So you're talking about $20.
Yeah.
How long does it take me to finish it and stuff? You start doing the math. You're like, wait a second. This isn't a side gig that makes more money than my normal gig.
Oh, those times, yeah. You try to turn those hobbies into
what am I trying to do here?
Into a side hustle. Then you try to think about scaling that side hustle into a business.
And it's like it doesn't make any sense because you're like, oh, I could scale this, but no, I would make less doing this even at scale than so why do I want to? What's wrong with me? Anyway, so that's
that's why I had it's on the collectibles, right? The reason I got into that because I like doing that as a hobby, and then I saw and when I was flipping stuff personally, I was like, oh, I'm doubling my money on these. I was like, yeah, why can't I buy a bunch of things and then try to scale? Then I once realized, well, once you really want to do this at a scale, margin becomes important. Yeah, and also margin becomes tighter too. So it's like, it's like,
because like, if you're looking at, I bought the collectible for this, I sold it for twice as much.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I have zero understanding of the market of that, but what's twice as much? You're making $50 on a collectible? I don't know.
It could range. It could be anywhere. If let's say something that you bought it for like $25, like a toy, then a year later, because they're not making anymore, it could be worth like $50 or $75.
Right. So
but then you got to deal with like the transactional cost of like, okay, if you're gonna be selling it on a channel like eBay or selling it on your own online store, you got percentage.
Like I made 100% on this.
You got to roll it back in inventory. And I got to buy more stuff, and it's a whole big mess. Yeah, I don't. It was a good experience, but I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, it's something that
because you worked out, and you're like, wow, I am making close to nothing. Yeah. Like actually, for the time it's taking me to do this. So I don't know, but for some reason I want to. Part of me thinks it's because if I sold enough stuff and I'd be like, look, the net that I made was like $5,000 over a year or something like that, which would not really be hugely impactful, right? But it's it'd be like, all right, that's nice.
But it would at least pay for the next bigger laser
printer, right? Yeah, it would pay for then I can say, you know,
and I think that's a good
CNC machine.
Yeah, that's a good place to kind of keep trying to monetize your hobby. Try to just have it pay for the hobby itself. Yeah, I think that's a good goal. I think that is a good goal.
Yeah, and it's like because if I can cover the cost of the laser and then be like, and now this is the excuse for me to buy the extrusions and stuff to build a CO2 laser, because honestly, as I look at the landscape of that, unless you're getting a hugely expensive CO2 laser, you're probably best it's weird. You're probably just best sourcing the same material these other manufacturers are using to build their US based laser. They're just buying material from China. Yeah. You're better just to source it directly from there. Know exactly, be like, I want to work with this Chinese manufacturer because I know their tubes are good. Build your own chassis, and then when it breaks, which it will, you know how to fix it because you put the thing together. Yeah. And get the gantry from a place where they make a yes. So anyway, looked enough to know that I know what I want to do, but yeah, it's like for some reason I don't want to do that unless I can somehow say, I paid for it.
I could just envision the Tim Lytle booth at the next kind of maker craft fair.
Maker
That,
Faire, yeah.
with all of your woodworkings that you made from your laser
Lasers and
fair.
CNCs
Yeah,
and yep. All right, so I don't know. What's the title for next show, Mark?
I'm
Episode 62.
I like I said, I only had a plan for this last week and this week, so I have no idea about next week. What am I going to be doing next week? Well, like I said, I'm going to be I'm moving some stuff. Like I said,
next week. I don't even know what next week holds for me.
I'm actually moving. Like I said, I'm going to actually want to move our website to because I need to build some stuff on Amazon Web Services, or move some stuff there. So I'm going to be moving it. I'm actually going to try to update. I decide on because the Gatsby build, which I still have to build the latest push.
Yeah,
that's been annoying me, and I've been wanting to just move it to a different platform. But I was like, I don't have time for that. And I'm like, really, I'm just going to bite the bullet. I'm just going to upgrade to the newest version of Gatsby. I need to fix the issues that I initially did it, but then what happened? It broke so many dependencies on the libraries that it was using, and I was like, that means I got to go into each one of these libraries and figure out what needs to be the correct version for the library for the newer version. So I think when I initially did it, it was when Gatsby first released the newer version, which was version, I can't remember, because I haven't looked lately. That version 5, maybe now 4 or 5. And when I first tried it, it was when they just released it, and none of the libraries really supported it, and that's what broke it. And also, like I said, the Node version, if I could build the project on Node 16, if I do it on Node 18 or higher, it doesn't build. So I got to update that. And it's a couple of the projects. I'm going to move over to AWS, and then we'll be talking about that.
Okay.
So I don't know. Just a general topic. I don't know. Summer refactors.
I think I'm going with laser dependencies.
Laser dependency. Because that's going to be a big focus of next week.
I don't know. I mean, you're talking about dependencies.
Oh, that's true. Dealing with dependencies. Yes.
So laser dependencies.
That's true.
So there, I think we've got the title. This feels a little bit like I know what PHP Ugly does with theirs is they crowdsource their titles
during the week before the show.
No, in the show, like the people.
In during the show,
throwing title ideas out.
Well, that's because they have a Discord. They have
Discord. They have people. They have people that listen to the show. That's the truth. They have people that listen to the show, Mark.
Well, they also do their show like at 11 o'clock at night on like a
midnight. It's now.
So they have some crazy. They have some crazy late night developers.
But it's 9 o'clock on the West Coast. That's the thing. It's just late for us, I guess.
And we're doing it on a Friday when everybody's just trying to get out of the office or
if I'm even here next Friday too, because
get the project done.
Next Friday is the 16th. Well, there's a high likelihood I'll be here because the 16th is the due date for our 9th. But
okay.
And babies never come on the due date.
Wow,
right?
that's like time flies. I remember when you first announced that. Oh, geez. Okay.
It's been 9 months ago. Or
wow.
8 months or whatever it was.
Yep.
But the 15th is our anniversary. My money's that she's going to come on the anniversary just to kind of steal that. Right. But we'll see. The 16th the due date. Generally, we've not had one hit the due date yet. So, but we'll see. We'll see. I may be slightly busy. We'll have to play it by ear.
No problem. Just keep me updated.
All right, I'm going to end the stream so I can